I never thought a frozen waterfall in my backyard would land me on the bad side of Brenda Carmichael, the president of the Oakmont Hills Homeowners Association in Boulder, Colorado. But there I was, standing in my kitchen on a freezing January morning, watching through the window as this woman marched across my snow-covered lawn like she owned the place. My name is Franklin Quinn, and I had just finished what I considered to be my masterpiece. After 3 weeks of carefully layering water over the natural rock formation in my backyard, building up ice in strategic places, and working with the sub-zero temperatures that Colorado had blessed us with this winter, I had created a stunning frozen waterfall that stood nearly 15 feet tall. The thing was magnificent, catching the morning light and refracting it into 1,000 shades of blue and white. My neighbors had been stopping by to take pictures. Kids pressed their faces against my back fence to get a better look. It was, without question, the coolest thing I had ever made. Brenda did not share my enthusiasm. I opened the back door before she could start pounding on it. She stood there in her perfectly pressed pantsuit, somehow managing to look overdressed and underdressed for the weather at the same time. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight I wondered if it gave her a headache, and her lips were pursed in that particular way that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "Mr. Quinn," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "we need to talk about that monstrosity in your backyard." I blinked at her. "You mean my frozen waterfall, the one that about 50 people have complimented me on this week?" "I mean the unauthorized structure that violates at least 6 different HOA bylaws," she snapped. "Did you submit a request for approval before building that thing? Did you consider how it affects property values? Did you think about drainage issues when it melts? Did you consider the aesthetic consistency of the neighborhood?" I had lived in Oakmont Hills for 3 years, and in that time, I had learned that Brenda Carmichael ran the HOA like it was her personal fiefdom. She had cited people for having the wrong shade of beige on their mailboxes. She had forced the Hendersons to remove a bird feeder because it was 3 inches too tall according to some obscure bylaw. She had even tried to ban Christmas lights that blinked at frequencies she deemed disruptive to the neighborhood harmony. But this was different. This was art. This was nature combined with human creativity. This was my backyard, and I had not built a permanent structure or altered the landscape in any way that violated actual law. "Brenda," I said, keeping my voice level, "it is ice. It will melt in the spring. I have not built anything permanent. I have not damaged any property. I have simply made something beautiful using water and cold weather." Her eyes narrowed. "The HOA bylaws clearly state that any outdoor installation visible from neighboring properties must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Your ice sculpture is visible from at least 4 different homes. You are in violation, Mr. Quinn, and I am here to inform you that you have 24 hours to remove it or face a fine of $500 per day, until it is gone." I felt my jaw tighten. "You want me to remove a frozen waterfall, ice. You want me to somehow make ice disappear in winter in Colorado. Use a hammer. Use salt. Use whatever you need to use, but that thing is coming down one way or another." She pulled out her phone and took several photos of my waterfall from different angles. "I am documenting this violation for our records. You will receive a formal notice by email within the hour." She turned on her heel and marched back across my lawn, leaving deep footprints in the snow that somehow looked aggressive. I stood there in my doorway, cold air rushing in, staring at the frozen waterfall that I had spent weeks perfecting. The ice caught the light, creating rainbows on the snow below. Water had frozen mid-cascade in some places, creating the illusion of movement frozen in time. I had used food coloring in strategic spots to create layers of blue and green within the ice, making it look like something out of a fantasy novel, and Brenda wanted me to destroy it with a hammer. I called my friend Marcus that afternoon. He was a lawyer, though not the kind who dealt with HOA disputes. He specialized in corporate law, but I figured he would know more than I did about my rights. "So let me get this straight," Marcus said over the phone, and I could hear the amusement in his voice. "You built a frozen waterfall, and now your HOA president is having a meltdown about it. That is the situation, yes. And it is just ice. No permanent structure, no damage to property, no changes to the actual landscape. Just ice and water and patience. And maybe a little bit of artistic vision." Marcus laughed. "Franklin, I think you might be in the clear legally. HOA rules are tricky, but they generally cannot regulate temporary decorations or seasonal displays. The problem is that fighting an HOA, even when you are right, can be expensive and exhausting. They have deep pockets and petty determination. So you are saying I should just take it down? I am saying you need to decide how much this matters to you. Because if you fight this, Brenda is going to make your life hell. She will find every tiny violation she can. She will scrutinize your trash cans, your grass height, your window treatments. These people have nothing but time and spite." I looked out my window at the waterfall. The afternoon sun was hitting it just right, and it glowed like something magical. "I am not taking it down," I said. The formal notice arrived in my email an hour later, exactly as Brenda had promised. It was 3 pages long, single-spaced, citing various sections of the HOA bylaws with the kind of detail usually reserved for legal briefs or instruction manuals for nuclear weapons. According to Brenda's interpretation, my frozen waterfall violated rules about outdoor structures, landscaping modifications, water features, seasonal decorations that exceeded certain size limitations, unauthorized construction, and something vague about maintaining neighborhood character. I spent that evening reading through my HOA bylaws, which I had to dig out of a box in my garage because I had not looked at them since I bought the house. They were exactly as boring and pedantic as I expected, but Marcus was right about one thing. The rules were vague enough that almost anything could be interpreted as a violation if someone was motivated enough. The thing was, I had checked the rules before I started building the waterfall. I had not found anything that explicitly prohibited temporary ice sculptures or natural formations. The rules talked about swimming pools and fountains and permanent water features, but ice. Ice that would melt on its own in a few months. That seemed like a gray area at best. I decided to respond to Brenda's email professionally. I wrote a carefully worded letter explaining that my frozen waterfall was a temporary, seasonal display that did not violate any specific bylaw. I cited the sections about temporary holiday decorations and argued that my creation fell under the same category. I pointed out that it caused no damage, created no safety hazards, and was actually enhancing the neighborhood's aesthetic appeal based on the positive feedback from multiple residents. I sent the email at 8 p.m. and felt pretty good about it. Brenda responded at 8:03 p.m. with a single sentence. Remove it within 24 hours or face fines and potential legal action. The next morning, I woke up to find an official-looking notice stuck to my front door. It was printed on HOA letterhead and informed me that I was now officially in violation, that the 24-hour deadline would expire at 5 p.m. that day, and that failure to comply would result in immediate fines and possible legal proceedings. I was drinking my coffee and contemplating my options when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find my neighbor, Tom Peterson, standing there with a sympathetic expression. "Hey, Franklin, just wanted to give you a heads up. Brenda is going around the neighborhood with a petition. She is trying to get signatures from people who want your waterfall gone." "Is she getting any signatures?" Tom shook his head. "Not many. Most people think it is cool. But she is telling everyone that it is a safety hazard, that kids might try to climb it and hurt themselves, that it is going to flood everyone's yards when it melts. She is really laying it on thick. It is not a safety hazard. It is ice, and it is in my fenced backyard." "I know, man. But you know how she is. Once she decides something is a problem, she does not let it go." Tom glanced over his shoulder like he was worried Brenda might hear him. "Look, a bunch of us think what you did is awesome. Sarah Martinez took her kids to see it yesterday and they loved it. The Richardsons put a picture of it on Facebook and got like 300 likes. You have got support in the neighborhood, even if Brenda does not want to admit it." That made me feel a little better, but it did not solve my immediate problem. 5 p.m. was approaching, and I had no intention of taking down the waterfall. At 4:30 p.m., I heard vehicles pulling up outside my house. I looked out the window and saw Brenda's silver Mercedes, along with 2 other cars I recognized as belonging to HOA board members. They got out and stood on the sidewalk, checking their watches and taking more photos of my property. I decided to go out and face them. "Afternoon, Brenda," I said as I walked down my driveway. "Nice of you to bring the whole committee." Beside her stood Gary Thornton, the HOA vice president, and Linda Morrison, the treasurer. They both looked uncomfortable, like they would rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Quinn," Brenda said formally, "it is now 4:35 p.m. You have 25 minutes to begin removing the unauthorized structure from your property. After 5 p.m., you will be fined $500 per day until the violation is corrected. Brenda, for the last time, it is not an unauthorized structure. It is ice. It is a violation of HOA rules, and as president, I have both the authority and the responsibility to enforce those rules." She held up a clipboard. "I have collected signatures from concerned residents who agree that your display is inappropriate and potentially hazardous. Can I see that?" She hesitated, then held the clipboard out just far enough for me to read it. I counted 8 signatures, and I recognized most of them as Brenda's close friends in the neighborhood. The same people who showed up to every HOA meeting to vote exactly how Brenda told them to. 8 signatures out of what? 200 homes in this neighborhood. That is quite a mandate you have got there. Linda Morrison spoke up quietly. "Franklin, maybe we could work out a compromise. What if you just reduce the size of it or put up some kind of barrier?" "Linda, there is no compromise with violations," Brenda cut in sharply. "The rules exist for a reason. We cannot pick and choose which ones to enforce based on popularity." Gary cleared his throat. "Actually, Brenda, I have been looking at the bylaws and I am not sure we have solid ground here. The rules about structures and water features specifically mention permanent installations. This is temporary ice." Brenda's face went red. "Gary, we discussed this at the emergency board meeting. We voted." "You called an emergency meeting without telling me," Gary said, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. "I found out about it from Linda after the fact. That is not proper procedure. You were unavailable." "I was at dinner with my wife." "You called the meeting with 2 hours' notice specifically when you knew I could not attend." This was getting interesting. I had not realized there was discord within the HOA board itself. Brenda drew herself up to her full height, which was considerable since she was wearing heels in the snow. The vote was legitimate. 2 board members are sufficient for emergency decisions, and I am here now at 5 p.m. ready to enforce that decision. Mr. Quinn, you are officially in violation. The fines begin tomorrow." "Then I guess I will see you in court," I said calmly. Her eyes flashed. "If that is how you want to play this, fine. But I should warn you, Mr. Quinn, that fighting the HOA is expensive. We have funds. We have lawyers on retainer. We have resources that you cannot match. Most people realize it is easier to just comply. Most people have not spent 3 weeks building something beautiful only to have someone tell them to destroy it for no good reason. The reason is that you violated the rules. That is all the reason I need." She turned and walked back to her Mercedes. Gary and Linda lingered for a moment. "I am sorry about this, Franklin," Linda said quietly. "For what it is worth, I think your waterfall is beautiful. My grandkids came by yesterday to look at it." "Thanks, Linda. That means a lot." Gary shook his head. "This is ridiculous. I am voting to table this at the next board meeting. We need to discuss this properly, not rush into fines and legal action." "I appreciate that, Gary." They left, and I went back inside. The deadline had passed, and I was officially a rule breaker in the eyes of the Oakmont Hills HOA. I felt oddly liberated. That evening, I posted about the situation on the neighborhood Facebook group. I kept it factual and non-emotional, just explaining what had happened and asking if anyone else thought the HOA's interpretation of the rules seemed overreaching. Within an hour, the post had 50 comments, and the majority were supportive of me. People started sharing their own stories of Brenda's overzealous enforcement, from citations about flower colors to threats over tree trimming schedules. But then, Sarah Martinez commented something that caught my attention. "Be careful, Franklin. When Jim refused to take down his basketball hoop last year, Brenda kept escalating until she called the police on him for disturbing the peace during a Saturday afternoon game with his kids." That seemed insane, but several other people confirmed similar stories. Brenda had a history of calling the police for HOA violations, trying to use law enforcement as her personal enforcers. It never worked, according to the comments, but it was stressful and embarrassing for the people involved. I should have known she would try the same thing with me. 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, I was in my backyard taking photos of the waterfall. The weather had been perfect for it, cold and clear, and the ice had developed new layers that caught the light beautifully. I was thinking about adding another section, building up the formation even higher. That was when I heard the knock on my front door. I walked through my house and opened the door to find 2 police officers standing there. They looked professional but slightly confused. "Franklin Quinn?" one of them asked. He was a tall guy, maybe in his mid-30s, with a name tag that read Officer Stevens. "That is me. What can I do for you, officers? We received a call about a possible safety hazard and illegal structure on your property. Mind if we take a look?" I sighed. "Let me guess. Brenda Carmichael called you." Officer Stevens glanced at his partner, a shorter woman whose name tag read Officer Chen. "We are not at liberty to say who made the complaint, but we are obligated to investigate reports of potential hazards." "Of course. Come on in." I led them through my house to the back door. "Fair warning, though, what you are about to see is just a frozen waterfall I built in my backyard. No illegal activity, no safety hazard, just ice and artistic expression." I opened the back door and stepped aside. Both officers stopped dead in their tracks. "Holy shit," Officer Chen breathed. The waterfall was at its absolute best in the morning light. The sun hit it at an angle that made the whole thing glow, the blues and greens I had layered into the ice creating an ethereal effect. The cascade of frozen water looked like it had been caught mid-flow by some kind of magic spell. Ice formations hung like sculptures, and the whole thing sparkled against the white snow. Officer Stevens walked closer, his expression shifting from official suspicion to genuine awe. You made this. Over the course of 3 weeks, yeah. I have been layering water during the coldest nights, letting it freeze in stages, building it up gradually. This is incredible, Officer Chen said. She pulled out her phone. Do you mind if I take a picture? My kids would love to see this. Go ahead. Officer Stevens walked around the formation, examining it from different angles. So the HOA complaint was about this. Someone called us because you built a frozen waterfall in your own backyard. Yep. The HOA president says it violates several bylaws. She has been threatening me with fines and legal action. It is ice, Officer Chen said, stating the obvious. It will melt. That is what I keep telling her. Officer Stevens turned back to me and he was shaking his head. Mr. Quinn, I have been a police officer in Boulder for 12 years. I have seen a lot of weird stuff, but this is honestly one of the coolest things I have ever seen. There is no safety hazard here. There is no illegal structure. This is art. Thank you. Try telling that to Brenda Carmichael. Officer Chen lowered her phone. Is this the same Brenda Carmichael who called us last year about someone's wind chimes? Probably. And the year before about a kid's lemonade stand? Would not surprise me. Officer Stevens sighed. Look, Mr. Quinn, we have to write up a report. But that report is going to say that we investigated the complaint and found no violations, no hazards, and no cause for concern. If the HOA president calls again, we will tell her the same thing. This is a civil matter between you and your HOA, not a police matter. I appreciate that, officers. Really? Officer Chen took a few more pictures, including one of herself standing next to the waterfall. My sergeant is not going to believe this. Can I give your address to some of my colleagues? I know a few guys who would love to see this. Sure, I do not mind. It has kind of become a neighborhood attraction anyway. The officers left, and I felt significantly better about the situation. If Brenda thought she could intimidate me by involving the police, she had badly miscalculated. Instead, the officers had validated what I already knew. The waterfall was not illegal, not dangerous, and definitely not a problem. I posted an update on the neighborhood Facebook group, mentioning that the police had visited and found no violations. The post went mildly viral within the community. People started organizing to visit my backyard, turning it into an informal neighborhood gathering spot. Parents brought their kids. Amateur photographers showed up with fancy cameras. Someone even suggested I should charge admission and donate the money to a local charity. Brenda, predictably, was furious. She sent me another email that evening, informing me that the police report was irrelevant to HOA violations, that the fines were accumulating, and that I now owed $1,500. She also informed me that if I did not pay and remove the waterfall within 1 week, the HOA would pursue legal action to place a lien on my property. That was when I decided to fight back properly. I hired a lawyer. Not Marcus, since HOA law was not his specialty, but a woman named Patricia Green who specialized in exactly this kind of dispute. She had a reputation for taking down overreaching HOAs, and her consultation fee was reasonable enough that I figured it was worth the investment. Patricia reviewed my case, read through all the emails and documents, examined photos of the waterfall, and studied the HOA bylaws. Then she invited me to her office for a meeting. Mr. Quinn, she said, leaning back in her chair with a slight smile, I think you have got an excellent case. The bylaws your HOA president is citing do not actually apply to temporary ice formations. She is stretching the definitions beyond any reasonable interpretation. More importantly, she violated proper procedure by calling an emergency board meeting without adequate notice to all board members. That vote she is relying on, it is not valid. So what do? We fight. We demand a proper board hearing with all members present. We present evidence that your waterfall violates no legitimate bylaws. We point out the procedural violations Brenda committed. And if she insists on pursuing this, we file a countersuit for harassment and abuse of authority. Will that actually work? Patricia's smile widened. Mr. Quinn, I have been doing this for 15 years. I have seen HOA presidents like Brenda Carmichael 100 times. They run their little kingdoms unchecked for so long that they forget there are actual laws and procedures they have to follow. When someone finally stands up to them, they usually fold. And if they do not fold, well, judges really do not like it when HOAs abuse their power. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. So what is the next step? We formally request a hearing before the full HOA board. We do it in writing, citing the specific bylaws that guarantee homeowners the right to contest violations. Brenda will have to schedule it within 30 days, and all board members must be present. In the meantime, those fines she is threatening, they are not legally enforceable until after a proper hearing. Patricia drafted a letter that afternoon, and I sent it to the HOA board that evening via certified mail and email. It was professional, detailed, and absolutely devastating to Brenda's position. It pointed out every procedural error, every overreach, every violation of proper HOA governance. It demanded a full hearing, and warned that continued harassment would result in legal action against the HOA and Brenda personally. Brenda's response came within hours. A barely coherent email rant about disrespectful homeowners, the breakdown of neighborhood standards, and the ungrateful people who did not appreciate all her hard work maintaining community values. She did not address any of the specific legal points Patricia had raised. She just kept insisting that she was right, that the rules were the rules, and that my waterfall was an abomination that had to go. But buried at the end of the email was a sentence that mattered. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks from that day. Those 3 weeks were intense. Brenda did not give up. She started what I can only describe as a campaign of petty harassment. She cited me for having trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day. I had put them out the night before pickup, which was completely normal. She sent me a violation notice about my mailbox being slightly faded. It was 3 years old and looked fine. She even tried to claim that my car was parked too close to the sidewalk in my own driveway, but the neighborhood had turned against her. People started speaking up at HOA meetings, questioning her priorities and her enforcement patterns. Gary Thornton became increasingly vocal about the need for reform. Linda Morrison quietly confirmed to several people that the emergency meeting had indeed been improperly called. More importantly, my waterfall had become famous. A local news station picked up the story after one of the visiting photographers submitted photos to them. They sent a reporter to interview me, and the segment aired on the evening news under the headline "HOA Gone Too Far." The reporter interviewed several neighbors, all of whom praised the waterfall and criticized the HOA's response. They even got a soundbite from Officer Stevens, who called it one of the most creative things I have seen in my career. Brenda declined to be interviewed, but they showed footage of her hastily walking to her car while refusing to comment. The story got picked up by other local media. A Denver Post reporter wrote a feature article about HOA overreach, using my case as the centerpiece. Suddenly, I was getting messages from people across Colorado, sharing their own HOA horror stories and expressing support. The waterfall itself kept growing. I could not help myself. With all the attention it was getting, I wanted to make it even better. I added new sections, created ice caves at the base, incorporated LED lights that made it glow at night. It became a genuine attraction, with people driving from other neighborhoods just to take pictures. The night before the hearing, I stood in my backyard and looked at what I had created. It had grown beyond my original vision into something truly spectacular, a frozen sculpture that seemed to capture the imagination of everyone who saw it. Whatever happened at the hearing tomorrow, I was proud of what I had built. The hearing was held at the community center and the room was packed. HOA hearings were normally sparsely attended affairs, but this one had drawn dozens of residents. I saw Tom Peterson, Sarah Martinez, the Richardsons, and many other neighbors. I even saw Officer Chen in civilian clothes, sitting in the back row. The HOA board sat at a table in the front. Brenda in the center, flanked by Gary and Linda, with two other board members I barely knew on the ends. Patricia sat beside me, her briefcase full of documents and evidence. Brenda called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a presentation about the importance of HOA rules and the dangers of letting violations slide. She showed photos of my waterfall, describing it in terms usually reserved for toxic waste sites or dangerous construction projects. She claimed it was an eyesore, a safety hazard, and a threat to property values. Then it was our turn. Patricia stood and calmly dismantled every single one of Brenda's arguments. She showed that the bylaws Brenda cited specifically referred to permanent structures and did not apply to temporary ice formations. She presented evidence that property values in the neighborhood had actually increased slightly, partly due to positive media attention. She showed emails from neighbors praising the waterfall. She even had a statement from a structural engineer confirming that the ice formation posed no safety risk. Then she addressed the procedural violations. Mrs. Carmichael called an emergency board meeting with only 2 hours' notice, deliberately scheduling it when she knew Mr. Thornton would be unavailable. This violates the HOA's own bylaws, which require at least 24 hours' notice for emergency meetings, and specify that all board members must be given reasonable opportunity to attend. The vote taken at that meeting is therefore invalid. Any fines or penalties assessed based on that vote are unenforceable. Brenda's face had gone from red to purple. That meeting was perfectly legitimate. We had a quorum. A quorum obtained through deliberate exclusion of a board member who you knew would vote against you, Patricia countered. That is not just a procedural violation, Mrs. Carmichael. It is evidence of bad faith. Gary Thornton spoke up. For the record, I was not properly notified of that meeting, and I would have voted against the violation citation if I had been there. I think Franklin's waterfall is a benefit to the neighborhood, not a problem. Linda Morrison nodded. I agree. I only voted yes because Brenda convinced me it was an emergency situation. But I have had time to think about it, and I do not believe this is a violation at all. Brenda looked like she was about to explode. This is absurd. The man built a massive structure in his backyard without approval. The rules are clear. The rules are actually quite vague, one of the other board members, a man named Robert Davis, said quietly. I have been reviewing them since this controversy started. We have never enforced them this way before. People put up Christmas decorations, Halloween displays, even temporary pools and play structures. We have never required pre-approval for any of that. Why are we treating ice differently? Because it is not a decoration, it is a structure, Brenda insisted. It is frozen water, Gary said flatly. It will melt in spring. How is that different from a snow fort or an ice sculpture? We have never regulated those. The debate continued for another 20 minutes, but the outcome was becoming clear. The board members, even those who had been neutral, were turning against Brenda's position. The procedural violations were too egregious to ignore, and the fundamental absurdity of the complaint was too obvious to defend. Finally, Gary moved to vote. I move that we dismiss the violation citation against Franklin Quinn, rescind all fines, and issue a formal apology for the improper procedure that was followed. Linda seconded the motion. The vote was 4-1, with only Brenda voting against it. The room erupted in applause. I felt Patricia squeeze my shoulder in congratulations. I looked at Brenda, whose expression had gone from furious to something approaching shock. She had not expected to lose, not in front of all these people. But it was not over yet. As the applause died down, Gary remained standing. I have one more motion to make. Given the serious procedural violations that occurred in this matter, and the pattern of overzealous enforcement that many residents have complained about, I move that we conduct a comprehensive review of our enforcement policies, and that the board president be required to consult with at least one other board member before issuing any future violation citations. Robert Davis seconded this motion immediately. This vote was also 4-1. Brenda stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is a betrayal. I have served this community for 6 years, maintaining standards, enforcing rules, keeping property values high. And this is how you repay me. By siding with a rule breaker and constraining my authority. Brenda, Linda said gently, we are not saying you have not done good work, but this situation got out of hand. We need better balance, better procedures. That is all we are trying to achieve. I will not be constrained by people who do not understand what it takes to maintain a proper community, Brenda said coldly. I resign from this board, effective immediately. She gathered her papers, stuffed them into her designer bag, and walked out of the community center. The room fell silent. Gary cleared his throat. Well, that was unexpected, but we still have a quorum and we still have work to do. Meeting adjourned. People came up to congratulate me as the room cleared. Tom Peterson shook my hand enthusiastically. Sarah Martinez hugged me and said her kids wanted to visit the waterfall again. Even Officer Chen came up and told me she was glad it had worked out. But I felt oddly deflated. I had won, but it did not feel like victory. It felt like I had just watched someone self-destruct over something that should never have been a fight in the first place. Patricia seemed to sense my mood. Do not feel bad for her, Franklin. Brenda made her own choices. She could have compromised at any point. She could have admitted she was wrong. Instead, she kept escalating until she painted herself into a corner. That is on her, not you, I know. It just seems like such a waste. It is a waste. But it is also a lesson for the next HOA president. Power comes with responsibility, and you cannot abuse it without consequences. I went home that night and stood in my backyard, looking at the waterfall in the moonlight. It looked different now, somehow. Less like a point of conflict, and more like what it had always been meant to be. Something beautiful I made because I could. The next morning, I found a note taped to my front door. It was from Brenda, handwritten on expensive stationery. Mr. Quinn, it read, you may have won this battle, but you have damaged this community irreparably. The standards I worked so hard to maintain will now crumble. Property values will fall. The neighborhood will descend into chaos. I hope you are proud of what you have accomplished. It was not signed. I crumpled it up and threw it away. Life in Oakmont Hills gradually returned to normal after that, though it was a new kind of normal. Gary Thornton became the interim HOA president, and one of his first acts was to establish clearer guidelines for what actually constituted a violation. The Architectural Review Committee was reformed with more diverse membership, and a new policy required any violation citation to be reviewed by at least 2 board members before being issued. My waterfall continued to attract visitors through the rest of winter. I kept maintaining it, adding new features, experimenting with different techniques. It became a genuine point of pride for the neighborhood, something unique that set Oakmont Hills apart. But February brought a strange development. I was at home one evening when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find two people I did not recognize, a man in an expensive suit and a woman with a professional camera. "Mr. Quinn," the man said, "my name is David Wu, and I am with the Colorado Tourism Board. We have heard about your frozen waterfall, and we are interested in featuring it in our winter tourism campaign. Would you be interested in discussing this?" I blinked at him. "You want to use my backyard ice sculpture for tourism promotion. It has already attracted significant attention online. We have seen the news coverage, the social media posts, the photographs. It is exactly the kind of unique, creative attraction that showcases what makes Colorado special. With your permission, we would like to include it in our promotional materials and possibly bring in professional photographers to document it." The woman with the camera smiled. "I am Rebecca Song, the photographer for the campaign. I have been following the story about your HOA dispute. When I saw the photos, I knew this had to be included. It is beautiful work." I invited them in and led them to the backyard. Rebecca immediately started taking photos, moving around the waterfall with professional efficiency, capturing angles I had never thought of. David explained the details of what they were proposing: professional photo shoots, potential video features, inclusion in both digital and print tourism materials. "There would be a licensing fee for using your image and your property," David said. "Nothing huge, but it would compensate you for the time and the use of your space. And of course, all the exposure could be beneficial if you ever wanted to do this kind of work professionally." I never thought of it as professional work. It is just a hobby. Art is art, Mr. Quinn. Some of the best artists started as hobbyists who got noticed. We talked for another hour, and by the end, I had agreed to let them feature the waterfall. Rebecca scheduled several photo shoots over the next 2 weeks, and David said he would send over the contracts. After they left, I called Marcus. "You are not going to believe this," I said. "The Colorado Tourism Board wants to feature my waterfall in their marketing campaign." Marcus laughed. "Of course they do. You accidentally created a tourist attraction while fighting your HOA. That is the most Colorado thing I have ever heard. Brenda is going to lose her mind when she finds out." Brenda resigned, remember, not your problem anymore. He was right, but I still felt a twinge of something. Not quite guilt, but an awareness that this whole situation had spiraled far beyond what I ever intended. I had just wanted to build something cool in my backyard. Now it was going to be in tourism brochures. The professional photo shoots were surreal. Rebecca brought lighting equipment and reflectors, making the waterfall look even more spectacular than it did naturally. She took hundreds of photos from every conceivable angle, during different times of day, in different weather conditions. She even brought in models to stand near the waterfall for scale and human interest. David arranged for a videographer to create a short promotional film, showing the waterfall in motion, or rather, showing the illusion of motion in frozen water, with dramatic music and sweeping camera movements. They interviewed me about the creative process, and I tried to explain how I had built it without sounding like a complete amateur. The tourism campaign launched in mid-March, just as the weather started to warm. By that point, the waterfall was beginning to show signs of melting, losing some of its defined edges and becoming more abstract. But the photos and videos captured it at its peak, and the campaign was immediately successful. The Colorado Tourism Board's social media posts about the waterfall went viral. Major news outlets picked up the story, not just local stations but national networks. Suddenly, I was doing phone interviews with reporters from New York and Los Angeles, explaining how I built a frozen waterfall and ended up in a fight with my HOA. The story seemed to resonate with people. It hit multiple trending topics: creative expression, conflicts with authority, the absurdity of HOA regulations, the beauty of temporary art. I started getting messages from people around the country, some sharing their own HOA horror stories, others asking for advice about ice sculpture techniques. And then Hollywood called. Well, not Hollywood exactly, but a production company that specialized in reality television and documentary series. They wanted to make a show about people who created unusual art installations and the conflicts that arose from them. My waterfall would be the premiere episode. I declined. The whole situation had gotten bigger than I was comfortable with, and I did not want to spend months with cameras following me around. But the fact that they asked at all was surreal. By April, the waterfall had melted completely. The rock formation in my backyard returned to being just a rock formation, with no evidence of what had been there, except for some grass that had been flattened by the ice. I felt oddly sad watching it disappear, like saying goodbye to something that had been a huge part of my life for months. But the impact lingered. Oakmont Hills had changed. The neighborhood had rallied together during the controversy, and that sense of community persisted. People who had never spoken before were now friends. The HOA meetings became more participatory, with residents actually showing up to voice their opinions. Gary Thornton proved to be an excellent president, focused on maintaining the neighborhood while respecting individual homeowners' rights. I received a formal letter of apology from the HOA board, acknowledging that the violation citation had been improper and thanking me for my patience during the resolution process. It was signed by all 5 board members, including 2 new ones who had been elected to fill vacancies. Brenda never apologized. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had moved out of Oakmont Hills entirely, selling her house and relocating to a different neighborhood with what was reportedly an even stricter HOA. Some people said she had become the president there within 6 months. I could believe it. In May, I received a check from the Colorado Tourism Board for the licensing fees. It was more money than I expected, enough to cover all my legal fees and still have a substantial amount left over. I donated part of it to a local arts foundation and used the rest to fund my next project, because I had decided to make this an annual tradition. Next winter, I was going to build something even bigger and better. I had learned a lot from the first waterfall, and I had ideas for improvements. Maybe multiple smaller waterfalls. Maybe ice caves you could walk through. Maybe colored lights frozen inside the ice itself. I talked to Gary about it first, wanting to make sure there would be no repeat of the Brenda situation. "Franklin," he said with a smile, "as far as the HOA is concerned, your winter ice sculptures are a neighborhood amenity. We have actually added a clause to the bylaws explicitly allowing temporary seasonal art installations. You are good to go. You changed the bylaws because of me. We changed them because they needed to be changed. Your situation just made it obvious. Now, what are you planning for next year? Because my kids are already asking." I showed him my sketches and plans. His eyes widened. "That is going to be incredible. You should do tours. Like, organized times when people can come see it safely." I was thinking about that. Maybe donate the tour fees to charity. That would be perfect. The neighborhood would love it. Summer and fall passed normally. I went back to my regular life and regular job as a software engineer. But in the back of my mind, I was always thinking about the waterfall, planning and designing and imagining what I could create when winter came again. In November, I started getting emails from strangers asking if I was going to build another waterfall. Apparently, the tourism campaign had created expectations, and people were actually planning trips to Boulder specifically to see what I would do next. No pressure. December arrived with perfect weather, cold and clear. I began construction on the new waterfall, applying everything I had learned from the first one. This time, I built multiple cascades that fed into each other, creating a complex network of frozen water that looked like something out of a fairy tale. I incorporated more colored ice, creating layers of blue, green, and even purple. I installed LED lights inside the ice itself, which took some engineering but created an amazing effect when lit at night. By mid-January, the new waterfall was complete, and it was even more spectacular than the first one. Word spread quickly, and soon I was getting dozens of visitors every day. I set up organized tour times, charging $5 per person with all proceeds going to a local children's hospital. The tours became so popular that I had to expand them to multiple times per day. Officer Stevens came by on one of the tours, bringing his whole family. "I told you last year this was the coolest thing I had seen," he said, "but you outdid yourself. This is incredible. Thanks. I could not have done it without you, you know. When you backed me up against Brenda, it made all the difference." He shook his head. "I just told the truth. There was no violation, no hazard, just art. That is not something police should interfere with. Still, I appreciate it." The second waterfall became even more famous than the first. News outlets did follow-up stories about the guy who fought his HOA and turned his backyard into a winter attraction. The tourism campaign featured it prominently, and Boulder started promoting itself as a destination for unique public art. In February, I was contacted by a publisher who wanted me to write a book about the experience. Building the waterfall, fighting the HOA, the unexpected fame that followed. I agreed, figuring it would be a good way to document everything and maybe help other people dealing with similar situations. The book came out the following year and sold surprisingly well. It hit a nerve with people who felt oppressed by their own HOAs, by petty bureaucrats, by anyone who tried to enforce arbitrary rules for the sake of rules. The story resonated because it was about standing up for something you believed in, even when the cost seemed high. But more than anything, it was about creating beauty for its own sake, about taking something temporary and making it matter, about using creativity to bring people together rather than drive them apart. I continued building waterfalls every winter. Each one was different. Each one pushed the boundaries of what was possible with ice and water and patience. They became an institution in Oakmont Hills, something the neighborhood was proud of and protective of. Parents brought their children year after year, creating traditions around visiting Franklin's winter waterfalls, and I never heard from Brenda Carmichael again. Sometimes I wondered what she thought when she saw the news stories, when she learned that the thing she tried so hard to destroy had become famous. Did she feel vindicated in her opposition, seeing how big it had gotten and believing her concerns about neighborhood disruption were justified? Or did she feel regret, recognizing that she could have been part of something special instead of fighting against it? I will never know. But I hoped, in whatever strict and orderly neighborhood she had moved to, that she had found peace, that she had learned something from what happened, that she understood now the difference between maintaining standards and crushing creativity. 5 years after the first waterfall, Oakmont Hills threw a winter festival centered around that year's installation. There were food trucks, live music, ice carving demonstrations, and tours of the waterfall every 30 minutes. Hundreds of people attended, from the neighborhood and from across Colorado. Gary gave a speech thanking me for putting Oakmont Hills on the map and for showing what was possible when art and community came together. I stood in my backyard that evening after the crowds had gone, looking at the frozen waterfall illuminated against the night sky. It was beautiful, maybe the best one I had ever made. But what made it truly special was not the ice or the lights or the technical achievement. It was everything the waterfall represented: perseverance, creativity, community. The willingness to fight for what you believe in, even when the odds seem stacked against you. The refusal to let petty bureaucracy crush something beautiful. That first waterfall, the one that Brenda Carmichael tried so hard to destroy, had been the catalyst for all of this. It had started as a simple project, something to do during a cold Colorado winter. But it had become something much more, a statement about the value of art, the importance of standing your ground, and the power of a community to come together around something positive. Officer Stevens had been right that first morning when he stood in my backyard and looked at what I had created. It was one of the coolest things he had ever seen, not because of the ice itself, but because of what it represented. Beauty created despite opposition, art surviving adversity, creativity triumphing over conformity. The waterfall melted every spring, returning the backyard to normal. But its impact remained permanent, rippling through the neighborhood and beyond, changing lives in small ways, inspiring people to create their own beauty, to fight their own battles, to stand up for what mattered to them. And it all started because Brenda Carmichael called the cops on a frozen waterfall, and the officer who responded said it was the coolest thing he had ever seen. That single moment of validation, that recognition from someone in authority that what I had created was worthwhile, had given me the confidence to keep fighting. It had shown me that not everyone in positions of power was like Brenda, that some people still valued creativity and common sense over rigid rule enforcement. Looking back now, I could see the whole arc of the story, the inspiration to build something beautiful, the conflict with an unreasonable authority, the community rallying together, the unexpected fame and opportunities that followed, the lasting change in neighborhood culture, the annual tradition that brought people together year after year, but at its core, it was a simple story. I built a frozen waterfall in my backyard. The HOA president tried to make me tear it down. I refused. And in the end, the waterfall won, not because I was particularly brave or special, not because I had unlimited resources to fight the HOA, but because the waterfall itself was undeniably beautiful, and beauty has a power that bureaucracy cannot overcome. People recognized that power. They responded to it. They rallied around it. The frozen waterfall was never just ice and water. It was a symbol of resistance against arbitrary authority, a celebration of individual creativity, a gathering point for community, a source of wonder for children, a beacon of beauty in the cold winter landscape. And every year when I started building the new waterfall, I remembered that first one, the one that almost never was, the one that Brenda tried to destroy before it could become what it was meant to be. The one that changed everything. The police had come to my house that day expecting to find a code violation or a safety hazard. Instead, they found art. And Officer Stevens, without realizing how much his words would matter, had given me exactly what I needed to hear at exactly the right moment. This is one of the coolest things I have ever seen. Those words had carried me through weeks of conflict, through HOA hearings and legal consultations, through moments of doubt when I wondered if I should just give up and tear it down. Every time I felt like backing down, I remembered the look on Officer Stevens' face when he first saw the waterfall. Pure, unfiltered amazement. That was what art was supposed to do. That was why I kept building these waterfalls year after year, despite the effort and the cold and the time investment. Because creating something that makes people stop and stare, that breaks through the mundane routine of daily life and reminds them that beauty exists, that was worth fighting for. The waterfalls had become my legacy in Oakmont Hills. Long after I was gone, people would remember the winter installations, the frozen art that appeared every year like magic. Children who visited as toddlers would bring their own children. The tradition would continue, passed down through generations. And somewhere, in whatever ordered and regulated community she now controlled, maybe Brenda would see a news story about the latest waterfall. Maybe she would recognize my name and remember the fight she lost. Maybe she would finally understand that some things are more important than bylaws and regulations and maintaining absolute control, or maybe not. Some people never learn, but that was okay. Because I had learned the most important lesson of all. When you create something beautiful, when you stand up for what you believe in, when you refuse to let small-minded bureaucracy crush your creativity, you inspire others to do the same. The impact spreads far beyond the original creation, touching lives in ways you can never fully measure. The frozen waterfall had taught me that. And every winter when I built a new one, I tried to make it even more spectacular than the last. Not to prove anything to Brenda or the HOA or anyone else, but to honor the spirit of that first waterfall, the one that almost never existed, the one that changed my life and my neighborhood in ways I never could have imagined. The coolest thing Officer Stevens had ever seen had become the coolest thing hundreds of people saw every year. And that was the best possible ending to a story that had started with conflict and threatened to end in defeat. Instead, it ended in beauty, in community, in inspiration, in annual traditions that brought joy to thousands of people, in a neighborhood transformed from a place of petty regulations into a place of creative celebration. And in my backyard, every winter, rising from the rock formation like a gift from winter itself, stood another frozen waterfall. Temporary but eternal, melting but recurring, constantly changing but fundamentally the same, beautiful, defiant, triumphant, just like it was always meant to be.